Prices are going up. So why does everything cost so much? And will this inflation continue? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Have you noticed that things seem to be a little more costly lately? Like gas and meat and even bicycles. And don't get me started on the rising cost of gas-powered meat bicycles. But what's causing this price inflation? And does the U.S. government actually want to stop it? Matt Canazda has more.
Thanks, Chris. Your money is worth less and less every year. That's inflation. And 2021 has been a big year for inflation so far. You might have noticed, for example, prices have been rising this year for things like coffee, sugar, and gasoline. The three things I need to start my morning. One product that's seen an enormous spike in prices is lumber. This piece of lumber, a standard 8-foot-long 2x4, was $3.15 at Home Depot in May 2020. Today, that same item costs $8.25. That's a 2.5-fold price increase. Is it because this tree was imported from Middle Earth on the Starship Enterprise? No. There are two main reasons for this cost increase: supply and demand. See, taking that economics class wasn't a waste of time. On the demand side, people were staying home more over the past year, and more people wanted wood for building stuff. There's been a surge in home remodeling and home building, especially since there's a huge housing shortage. Last fall, single-family home construction hit its highest levels since 2016, which has increased demand for lumber. Wait, people were supposed to be constructive during the pandemic? The only thing I finished was all 17 seasons of The Bachelorette. Twice. The surge in home building and remodeling was also coaxed along by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has kept interest rates insanely low to spur economic growth. But one side effect is mortgage rates dropped to their lowest levels in history, and that encouraged people to buy new homes and remodel. Again, this increased the demand for lumber. And on the supply side, there's been a shortage. Don't worry, there are still plenty of trees out there to chop down. I'm looking at you, Middle-earth. But thanks to the government's pandemic restrictions, a lot of lumber mills that process wood from logs into usable lumber have been closed, or short-staffed, or short on supplies. And that's a big problem with demand so high. I bring up lumber because it illustrates what can happen during an extreme scenario. And we've had an extreme scenario. Not just COVID itself, which was bad enough, but also the government's extreme response that's forced unprecedented changes to consumer behavior and business operations. Never in history has the government forced people to stay home for so long or for small businesses to close for so long. So, in addition to making all of us feel lonely and isolated temporarily, it also socked us with higher prices that could last for years. Officially, we've seen 4.2% inflation over the past 12 months. That's according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. If things keep getting more expensive, before long, rappers throwing hundreds of dollars in the air will go from how they show off to how they pay for a Slim Jim. Every month, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks the market prices paid by urban consumers across a basket of goods and services. They put that together in what's called the Consumer Price Index. There are some flaws to their methodology, but the simple result is one single number. On average, how much did prices go up from a year ago? Their latest calculation says average prices have gone up 4.2%. That's a lot more inflation than we're used to seeing in the last couple decades, which is about 2% a year. But again, 4.2% is just an average for the year. Lumber prices are way up. Clothing prices are barely up. And gas prices are changing more than AOC's story about what she went through on January 6th. Don't worry about gas prices, though. Sure, this photo of gas prices in San Francisco 2 weeks ago showed nearly $6 a gallon. And you've no doubt seen similar price hikes in your neighborhood. But as the White House press secretary said, as Americans are hitting the road, they're paying less in real terms for gas than they have on average over the last 15 years. Oh, and here I thought filling my tank for $45 instead of $30 was more expensive. But I guess I just can't do math in real terms. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics calculated that gas prices have risen a staggering 49% year on year, which also must be wrong because the White House press secretary said so. I'm sure she has her finger on the pulse more than a bunch of dumb statistics or objective reality. Another reason we're seeing crazy inflation for certain consumer goods is that it costs more to ship stuff. Container shipping prices have quadrupled along some routes. That's mostly due to government shutdowns of non-essential businesses around the world. That broke a lot of links in supply chains. Then, when businesses were allowed to open back up, it didn't magically fix those broken links. For example, some companies had laid off workers, others had gone out of business. And to make a stupid problem stupider, back in March, a giant container ship decided to go through the Suez Canal, but sideways. It blocked shipping for an entire week until they dug it out. But global shipping still hasn't recovered. That's raised shipping prices for everything. So be prepared to wait longer and pay more for your made-in-China Kanye West and Kim Kardashian bobbleheads. Plural. I know you ordered 2 of them. I did. In summary, even as the world slowly wakes up from the coronavirus, everything is still stupid and stupidly expensive. Some of this inflation may be short-term. The White House calls it a transitory phenomenon. Maybe it will be, because as we know, businesses absolutely love lowering the price of products consumers have shown they're willing to pay more for. But as lumber mills ramp up production and cargo ships stop trying to go through canals sideways, many of these prices will come down eventually. But this year's spike in prices of specific goods is a reflection of a larger trend that's not going away: macroinflation. That is, over time, prices always go up. And it turns out the US government actually wants this kind of inflation every year. But that's not a rabbit hole I want to go down. Who am I kidding? Let's go down the rabbit hole right after the commercial break. Welcome back. Are you ready to go down the rabbit hole with me? Seamus, that animation doesn't seem right. But anyway, as consumers, none of us like seeing prices go up. It means our hard-earned savings can't buy as much. I want my Kim Kardashian bobbleheads and I want them cheap. In theory, there's no reason consumers should experience inflation every year, at least not with most consumer goods. That's because as technology improves, it costs less and less in real dollars to manufacture stuff and ship stuff. So, in theory, prices should go down every year, not up. But the US government doesn't want this. The government and the Federal Reserve both agree there should be a little bit of steady inflation each year, regardless of external conditions. Ideally, not enough inflation to make people panic about losing their savings, but still enough to achieve the government's long-term goals. And if that sounds shady and vague, relax, there's nothing to worry about. What's that, Shelley? Oh, never mind. There's so much to worry about. Economists who align with the establishment say that annual inflation of about 2% is ideal. But over time, that really adds up. It's why your grandpa could buy a hot dog for a nickel 70 years ago, and 70 years from now, your grandson will ask you, what's a nickel, as he pays $1,000 for a bug protein dog using the chip implanted in his eyeball. Anyway, these economists say inflation is better than deflation, which scares people into saving money instead of buying stuff. Heaven forbid. Whereas inflation can push producers to make more goods and push consumers to buy things now instead of waiting for prices to go down. Yay, consumerism. But the deeper reason is inflation is good for the US government. Every year, except for a brief period during the Clinton administration, Congress has spent more money than it raised in taxes. That creates a budget deficit. But that's not a problem. The government can just borrow more money. If the government were a person, he'd be that guy who owes money to everyone he knows and yet barely makes rent each month. He should just move back in with his parents. But there are still some hurt feelings from when he left home. Every year, Congress borrows more money in the form of issuing bonds. This debt has helped us pay for important things, like invading Iraq and Afghanistan because Saudi Arabians attacked the World Trade Center. But borrowing absurd sums of money is not just a George W. Bush problem. Every president since, including possibly one you liked, has signed bills that increase the deficit. Obama did it, Trump did it, Biden did it, Harris did it. Oh wait, that hasn't happened yet. Check back in a few months. The point is, money is cheap. Let's spend it. And money is cheap because whenever we start to run out, the Federal Reserve, aka the Fed, can always print more. You know the meme. No wonder there's a lumber shortage. All those trees are being used to print money. Okay, technically, the Fed doesn't print money. It buys bonds using electronic dollars it creates from thin air, and that injects real dollars into the economy. Every time the Fed does this, it creates inflation, and the Fed does it every year, some years more than others. Last year, more than ever in history. The reason it's so cheap to borrow money right now is that the Fed has kept interest rates at historic lows. After COVID, the Fed dropped interest rates to essentially zero. In practical terms, a zero interest rate means the US government can borrow money for almost nothing to pay for spending bills. And they've borrowed trillions of dollars just since last year. The government goes into debt by issuing bonds, like 30-year Treasury bonds. And the Fed buys these bonds by creating money from thin air, like I said. When the Fed creates money to pay for Congress's stimulus packages, some of that money ends up in the hands of consumers. Stimulus checks are good for everyone who needs the money now, which is most people. Because not all of us can just print money whenever it suits us, even if you lock yourself inside the Royal Mint. But long term, these kinds of stimulus packages make everyone's money worth a little less. That's because when the Fed prints money to pay for it, there's a larger supply of money. That pushes prices up, and that's why you see inflation long term. But the US government is actually happy about this kind of inflation, because the less money is worth in the future, the cheaper it will be to pay off their 30-year bonds when they expire in 2050, and you can barely pay for a basic medical procedure for $1 million. Wait, did I say 2050? That's already happening. But that's an entirely different rabbit hole. Ah, no, stop! Anyway, the Fed's money creation also leads to another type of inflation, asset inflation. And I'll explain how that helps the rich get richer right after the break. Welcome back. After the stock markets collapsed in February 2020, the Fed spent trillions of dollars to bail out Wall Street. That worked out really well for the rich. I just wish I could find someone who loved me the way the Fed loves Wall Street. Okay, I'm going to compartmentalize that and get back to inflation. When the Fed bailed out Wall Street last year, that created asset inflation. Asset inflation is a little different from consumer inflation. It made the price of stocks go up, and as a consequence, it also increased the prices of things people who own stocks spend money on, things like luxury goods, real estate, and expensive art. This is good if you already own stocks in real estate. It's not so good if you don't. For example, Bill Gates increased his net worth by billions last year just by owning stocks in land, while pretending to be a doctor who definitely had no relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Meanwhile, you increased your net worth with a $1,400 stimulus check, unless you had to spend that on rent or food or gas. Which is to say, inflation is not equitable. It hurts the poor and middle class people who try to save money. It helps rich people who already own stocks and real estate and so on. Inflation is a key reason why wealth inequality increases every year. Inflation means that people who already have more stuff see the value of their stuff go up. People who have only cash savings or rely on salaries from working see the value of their money go down. That's what inflation does. It takes from the poor and gives to the rich. And the rich use it to snatch up everything in the world. And now also in space. Because in space, no one can hear you scream about wanting a union. When we look at charts showing a big wealth gap between blacks and whites, the reality is staggering. But it's less a result of systemic racism than a result of systemic inflation. When the price of everyday goods goes up, it hurts all poor people equally. But since most of the richest Americans are white, and inflation helps the rich get richer, it appears on average to help whites and hurt minorities. But that's mostly because it helps rich people more. I call this rich privilege. So as long as Congress keeps spending more than it brings in, and the Federal Reserve keeps printing money so Congress can inflate its way out of debt, we will always see inflation, and it will always help the rich and hurt the poor. So when you see lumber prices spike to the moon, where Jeff Bezos is setting up his newest Amazon factory, that's not a huge issue. The price of lumber will come down. But overall, your money will never be worth as much in the future as it is today. So buy your Kim Kardashian bobbleheads now before prices go up. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Matt. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. And since your money won't be worth much later, please support America Uncovered now through the crowdfunding website Patreon. We rely on your support because, surprise, we don't have any support from the U.S. government. Visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered to learn more. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.